When you're doing purchases and sales of businesses, one of the most basic structural questions that can be asked is, are you doing an asset purchase? They sometimes refer to an APA, asset purchase agreement, or a share sale or share purchase. Okay. Now, just quickly, why? So the preference for investors, usually from the standpoint of the people selling the business, that is to say, is usually to sell the shares, usually better from their standpoint. So the question then is, well, why would that not happen? And the answer is that when somebody is buying shares of a business, they are inheriting everything that goes along with that business, specifically liabilities that may not know about. And so when somebody purchases the shares, the liabilities tend to go with the new shareholder, and that becomes problematic. Okay. So very, very important to recognize this and to say, well, if I'm buying, I probably want to insulate myself from risk. So as a purchaser, my default usually is going to be that I want to purchase the assets. And what I do is I have this asset purchase agreement. This lays out all the different assets that I'm wanting to assume. And then they're typically going to be transferred from whatever the legal entity is into my new legal entity. So here's the problem. Problem is that oftentimes, let's say you're doing some sort of a nice international structure and you're thinking to yourself, hey, great, I might like to get involved in investing in businesses in this country or that country, right? Well, if you're in a situation where you have to, for some reason, end up buying a company or assets, like having some presence in a country, you may expose yourself to that tax regime, even though you may have nothing to do with that tax regime, or you may not want anything to do with that tax regime. But when you're doing the acquisition, the foreign company acquires the assets, they don't acquire the shares, and as a result, they're held by a foreign holder. And in some cases, it might be as simple as that. Maybe you can just transfer the operation so that it's not locally U.S. taxable. That would be great. This would be, pretty common if you're talking about, say, an online business or something like that. However, maybe you're doing a business that actually has operations in the U.S. And so you're going to end up being exposed to some kind of tax. Well, what are the things that are going to happen then? Well, you might have to then take those assets and put them into a U.S. company. Or maybe what you do is you say, okay, well, I can retain ownership of certain parts of the assets or all the assets outside of the country, but I can set up new operations to basically monetize and run those assets within the country. Okay, that might be a possibility. Another thing is you might be able to have the assets and then rent them to a local entity that is basically going to monetize them on your behalf and generate returns that way. In each of those cases, the advantage that you end up with is you're in a situation that now when you sell the assets in the future,